Very warm good afternoon to everyone. Secretary Shri Sanjay Bhattacharya and Chairman ICM, Joint Secretary Shri Abbagani Ramu and CEO ICM. The moderator for the day, Professor S.K. Sasikumar from VV National Labour Institute. Our esteemed panel, Shabari from ILO, Professor Tasneem Siddiqui is yet to join from Bangladesh, and Shanta Kulisekara from IOM Sri Lanka, and Sri Lakshman Basnet from Nepal. A very warm welcome to all of you today. We are organizing this regional sort of consultation for the first time under ICM's this broad framework of monthly panel discussions. So we really look forward to the deliberations today. A few housekeeping rules at the outset. Kindly keep your microphones on mute so that we can have uninterrupted communication. Except the speakers, the others may keep their videos turned off as well. We have time allotted for discussion towards the end. You may use the chat box to raise your questions. Also, let us know if we, during the Q&A, if we miss out your name, we may see that through the chat box. So you may use that for that purpose. So without wasting much time, I'll invite Secretary CPV and OIA to make his initial remarks.
Thank you, Surabhi. Firstly, congratulations once again to ICM for organizing this seminar. As you said, this is the first initiative at the regional level, and ICM has been organizing twice a month sessions for the last several months, taking advantage of the COVID situation to bring together the different stakeholders so that we have some sort of common understanding. And we hope that this will improve the understanding of best practices at the regional level so that we can not only understand but coordinate on how we take the process forward. I must also thank ILO for having coordinated and taken the initiative in the first regional meeting that was held, I think in the month of July, which was held, of course, at the official level, which involved the same countries that are participating today. And I think at that particular instance, we had also tried to bring together the Philippines, which is another major country from where a large number of migrants go out. So this kind of interaction at the official level and at the level of think tanks and other stakeholders is extremely useful. And we hope that this is something that will also lead to further and greater collaboration among the think tanks themselves. And I know that ICM for sure is keen to establish partnerships with think tanks across the region where we can look at common issues, where we can work on common papers to have better solutions for our migrants when they go out. A few points that I wanted to make before the panel comes on, and congratulations, Ruby, for having such an impressive list of panelists from different countries and from the international agencies, because this will truly add value to the kind of work that we are currently engaged in. A few points that I wanted to make is that in many ways, I think socially, culturally, in terms of the skill background, in terms of the country, the destination countries that we go to, there is a certain South Asian identity. And so when it goes across from Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and India, you find very, very many features that are very, very akin. And this also kind of manifests itself in the kind of camaraderie and brotherhood that exists when the migrants go across to the destination country. And they often live in the same hostels at times. They end up doing the same kinds of work. We often have friends from other countries coming to the Indian consulates and embassies in some of the countries overseas, asking for, asking questions about how their problems can be resolved. So in many ways, we share a certain identity. And so this kind of a platform where we share our experiences and our views will be extremely useful. At a certain level, I think at the regional level, we have the Colombo process, which is deliberated on many of these issues. There is also a technical committee which has worked out on several papers in this area. And of course, most recently with one of the areas where we have a very large number of people going, namely to the Gulf region, we also have the Abu Dhabi dialogue, which has brought together many of us together to look at what the issues are and how we go forward. So from our perspective, from the official perspective, I think the issue really is of what is our migration policy and what are the governance mechanisms. And I can tell you that on the part of India, our endeavor, as you probably know, we are currently operating under the 1983 Act of Migration. And that, while it serves a very useful purpose, probably has been overtaken by a large number of developments that have taken place across, primarily in terms of the kind of skills, the kind of technology development, the kind of destination countries that people go to, the kind of administrative regimes that operate in destination countries, and of course, the greater sense of openness and transparency and democracy that has grown in the source countries from where migrants go. And so, as you probably know, we are now working on a new migration management bill, and this particular bill will try to address many of those issues. Essentially, what it will try to do is to make migration more open so that it is a more transparent process. It will also try to bring in a greater degree of formalization of the one of the principal stakeholders, which is the human resource agencies who facilitate the process of people going out. What it will also try to do is to bring in the market into a much more active role in the process of the migrant preparing for his or her departure, the involvement of the foreign employer, the recruitment, the human resource agencies, and the state on both sides. It will also involve a lot of process that is currently underway between India and some of the recipient states in terms of the kind of integration that we do. And finally, what it will also try to do is to bring in what we call the care element, because over a period of time, as you know, in India, we have attached a very high level of importance to the diaspora. And therefore, the level of care that's to be provided to a diaspora member who is in distress or in some difficulty, the kind of facilities that we can provide him or her through the institution of the embassies and the consulates has been further strengthened, and mechanisms have been built in, which will come into this new bill. As you know, that is currently under discussion. But we would be very, very keen to know how the experience has been in some of our neighboring countries, because one of the things that we have to prepare for, and I've said this before, is that we have to prepare for the change of technology. And that basically means that the element of skill has to be brought into the picture in a much more intimate manner. So we have, as you know, today something called the pre-departure orientation training, which is essentially of soft skills. But what we will try to do through the new bill and through the new mechanisms is that we will bring in additional skills, which will be more relevant to the jobs of tomorrow, which will be more relevant to the destinations that are probably not as popular today, but are likely to become more popular in the days to come. And finally, I think we also have to prepare for COVID has taught us in a very obvious manner that we have to prepare for situations like these pandemics where there would be economic distress. And I think we have come to the realization today that there may not be truly a post-COVID world. It will be a world in which there will be a managed COVID environment. So how do we manage this? Of course, there's one scientific medical aspect, which is something that others will do and work is afoot on that. But I think what we are looking at is what is the social way of managing COVID? How do we manage repatriations, which is the first thing that come about? How do we look at them when the international migrant comes back home? And is this an opportunity for him to just kind of spend time with his family and friends, or is this a time when he prepares through reskilling or upskilling, preparing for new jobs, preparing for new destinations that may emerge? Because this new world that we're looking at is going to be a little different from the one that he or she had encountered. So, is this an opportunity for preparation for the future? And in this, the stakeholders may be slightly different. So, some of the people who would be doing the skilling might be more intimately connected with technology, with the chambers of commerce, with industry. And so, in a sense, we have to bridge that loop, that gap, so that the loop is complete. And fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence, high technologies, the digital era are things that are incorporated, because as we prepare the workers and professionals today for the world of tomorrow, these are, there will be a new set of people that they will have to engage. And so I think we have a fairly exciting and challenging task ahead of us. I know that with all my friends in the South Asian region, in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, who are participating today, we have very active bilateral channels of engagement as well. We have, as I mentioned earlier, certain regional initiatives which would add to the flavor. We've always had the active cooperation and support of the UN and other international multilateral agencies. Their experience of best practices from what they have seen across the world is extremely useful. And as I said, we need to incorporate the other stakeholders in a much more intimate manner. And for me, the most key elements of this group of stakeholders would be the people from industry, the people from technology, the people who would be the foreign employers and the human resource agencies. And of course, we must have a system of governance which puts the migrant at the center. So we try and evolve an ecosystem around him. The migrant, over a period of time, the world is becoming flat, but not yet for all migrants. And so, but we're moving in that direction. And I think our endeavor should be in that direction as well, so that the workers become more enabled, more empowered, so that the professionals become more willing to share information. Because the other thing that is also important is that in terms of governance, it is very important to have good data available. And that will then become a very important tool for the management and governance of any migration policy, such that the maximum is realized. So we are today moving from what used to be the maxim till recently of safe and orderly, safe and legal migration, to one in which I think we also have to be smart, caring, and sustainable. So, I mean, that's too many words to put into any kind of policy. But I think the world is becoming at one level more complex and challenging. But at the same time, I think there are great opportunities that are coming up. Surabhi, thank you for putting together such a great panel. I didn't wish to say so many words, but I thought I would set the tone. And I look forward to very exciting discussions. And I must say that the discussions that we've had in the past on this particular panel, organized by ICM and mostly in the domestic panels, of course, have been extremely useful towards our policy formulation. So we look forward to your suggestions today. Thank you very much. And I look forward to your conversations.
Thank you, sir. We'll now move towards our main discussion. And let me introduce our moderator for the day, Dr. S.K. Sasikumar, who is an economist by training, has had over 30 years of experience in researching on migration issues and training. He has served on various government as well as non-governmental bodies. He's the editor of the peer-reviewed academic journal Labor and Development. He's the coordinator of the Center for Labor Market Studies. and Integrated Labor History Research Program of VV National Labour Institute. So over to you, Dr. Sasikumar, to carry forward the proceedings.
Thank you so much, Surabhi. Respected Secretary, distinguished panelists, officials of the Ministry of External Affairs and the ICM, some of the most distinguished experts in the area of migration studies who are present in this platform, and dear friends. It's really a great honor for me to moderate this discussion, and let me thank the ICM and the Ministry of External Affairs for giving me this privilege. In fact, as Secretary rightly said, the kind of initiatives that the ICM has been taking in recent months has been very significant. As a student, as a practitioner, as an academic related to migration, what I have seen in the last 6 months to 1 year has been amazing. We have had very fascinating panel discussions centered around very interesting themes, ranging from recruitment systems to data management to bilateral agreements at the national level. And what this has done, as rightly Secretary said, this is what we should be we should be considering it, is to pitch migration at the center of public policy discourses. And sir, as you very rightly said, it's only by such a discourse that we can bring migrant at the center of public policy making. So that way, it's a very good initiative, and I must compliment the officials of the ICM and the MEA for this. And more importantly, if you look at the kind of people who have been not only being panelists in this, the kind of people who are attending these panels are also very, very significant. They are ones who have been writing on migration for some time. They are ones who have been practicing on migration for a long time. So this is a very, very tremendously very good thing to happen in the context of migration, especially at a time when migration is being looked at from the perspective of what impact the COVID has had on migration. This is very significant. And more such discussions at the regional level becomes very central. At the regional level becomes very central, as Secretary rightly said, though the policies may be formulated at the national level, the learnings, the cooperation between the countries at the regional level becomes very, very significant. And South Asia, the kind of South Asian identity that Secretary spoke of, that itself is very evident that you can't have a better region to think and discuss migration than South Asia. You talk of anything in terms of benefits, remittances. We have had benefits in terms of poverty reduction. We have had benefits in terms of improvements in standards of living. But we have had our share of problems also. The recruitment costs are still very high. There are abuses. But that does not mean that we have not moved. We have moved. It's only that we have to share, we have to cooperate, and we have to sustain what we are doing in terms of good things. So that way, this is a very important theme to discuss. And I'm so happy that some of the stalwarts in the area of migration studies, migration policies are going to be the panelists. I mean, most of them are very close friends of mine, so it's very difficult to introduce them. So let me try to briefly tell what they are. One, Shabri. Of course, Shabri is one person whom I like a lot because I genuinely believe he's a very fantastic public policy analyst on migration. And he's a doer of all kinds of things. I've seen him doing lots of things ever since he has taken over as the specialist of migration of the South Asian region. He also has had experience in managing global migration at the regional level, several global compact on migration. He was involved in it. And he is also involved with a corridor which is very significant for South Asia. That is the Gulf, South Asia Gulf corridor. So a wonderful resource to have. Shabri, welcome, a very hearty welcome. Now we have Tasneem. Tasneem has joined us now. Tasneem, to me, again, a very old friend, is the academic face of South Asian migration. You talk of South Asian academic, the first the people will ask, oh, you know Tasneem? Oh, RMMRU? Yeah, that's what. Tasneem is from RMMRU, and she is a political scientist and has done a lot of work in the area of migration, particularly linking issues like culture, climate change, gender, etc., to the question of migration, which is also very central. Migration is not a standalone thing. It has very strong interconnectedness. And Tasneem has also been successful in bringing about very significant policy pronouncements, policy changes in Bangladesh, particularly with respect to women migration. Tasneem also organized a fascinating event, which I had the privilege to attend long time back in 2003. And I can tell you with some certainty, if you really want to learn what hospitality is all about, go to Tasneem. Tasneem, welcome to you. Now, let me welcome Shanta Kolashekara, our friend from Sri Lanka. He's the head of migration governance. Shanta, I have never had a chance to meet you, but I'm sure that I would be loving to listen to you. You are a practitioner who has been working on questions like labor migration, visa, border management, identity solutions, process automation, and re-engineering. And you have also been associated with very key projects in Sri Lanka, developments of labor immigration policy, Sri Lanka integrated border management, and Sri Lanka biometrics project. Fantastic initiative. Shanta Kolashekara, a hearty welcome. Now we come to Lakshman. What should I say about Lakshman? Again, a very old face amongst the migrant community and students of migration. So Lakshman ji has been associated with activism with respect to migration. We all know, if you really analyze the role of trade unions in international migration, that has not risen up in this region, which is a very surprising thing. And one among those faces, which every time in a very positive way has looked at migration from an activist point of view, is Lakshman Bhai, who served as a governing body member of the International Labour Organization for a long span of 12 years. So Lakshman Bhai, hearty welcome to you, and I'm sure that we will be listening from you a lot of perspectives from the grassroots level, because at the end of the day, it is that connect between the micro, the grassroots level, and the macro at the centralized level that we need to talk of in terms of sustaining cooperation also. So we have a fascinating panel. So I'm so delighted. But as Surabhi said, right up, 12 minutes, Shabri, Tasneem, all friendship would be broken after 12 minutes. 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a small node, okay? And last 2 minutes, it's up to you to wind up. And 12 minutes is 12 minutes, because we have to give, so we have some great academic and practitioners in the forum. I would like to ask each one of you to also raise questions, as Surabhi said. Put them in the chat box. We can try to consolidate it and post it to the panelists. So there we are. So over to you, Shabri, and 12 minutes.
Thank you so much, Shashi. I feel I need to run now, literally, based on the introduction you've given. But what a fantastic opening. I mean, the secretary and you, really, the positivity that you bring to such a regional conversation is so important. Secretary Sir, I mean, when you led that conversation in July amongst the 4 countries, so I sent, of course, as any other protocol-based issues, when I received the invitation from Surabhi, so kind enough to invite me to be on this panel, I sent it to Dagmar. And the first thing that Dagmar said was, this is a brilliant continuation of what we had in July. Exactly, sir, what you mentioned. And in July, you concluded with 5 takeaways. And in those takeaways, one of the last things that you said, which you repeated today, is with regards to the fact that put migrants at the center of it. But you also concluded by saying that in the next conversation, we should have every stakeholder group that is involved in labor migration in South Asia here. I noticed the presence of course, the civil society groups here. I noticed Andrew Samuel from Sri Lanka as an example. I noticed the presence of academics. Certainly, Tasneem is on the panel. There are others. I noticed the presence of recruitment agencies like Suresh Kumarji, who is perhaps one of those leading voices on the recruitment from the recruitment industry. Lakshmanji certainly a Sartuk big brother. And I also noticed the presence of Gayatri Kant from the International Organization for Employers. And of course, you also managed to bring the ILO and the IOM together in this conversation. Sir, if this is not one of your promises well kept, nothing better can explain it. So thank you very much for bringing us together. I think this is the recommendation, my first recommendation, is any conversation going forward should be along these lines, exactly the way exemplified through such a webinar. When we talk about data, and this is something that keeps coming up, Secretary mentioned it towards the end of his introductory remarks now, we're talking about, as per the UN estimates in 2019, there are 272 million global migrants around the world. Out of those 272 million, the ILO said there are 164 million migrant workers. Out of those 164 million migrant workers, South Asia alone has close to 50 million migrant workers. So that means South Asia is contributes to 1/3 of the global migrant worker population. And within South Asia, India, of course, leading the pack head over heels when it comes to the other countries in the region. So this is important for us to recognize when it comes to data. In that context, one of my immediate recommendations would be, and taking again the point that the Secretary made about the role of institutions like the ICM, something that we are engaging with the IOM and other UN organizations is to establish a regional knowledge hub on labor migration for South Asia. And Secretary, sir, I look to you and other government representatives, around South Asia to help us build this. This is something that we have drawn, in terms of finances. Can I also say we've drawn internal funds for this? We have the possibility of establishing such a knowledge hub for South Asia, specifically looking at data and all aspects of research. So that's very clearly one that we would like to take forward in the coming years. We are also thinking about how to anchor it within an academic institution, perhaps, in South Asia. So therefore, the data and the knowledge hub angle would be priority. I go back to one of the other points that both the Secretary and Shashi, you mentioned, and that is with regards to the welfare of migrant workers specifically. Yeah, we've heard now in the context of COVID, the number of migrant workers who've been laid off, had their contracts terminated, their visas and work permits expired. They've had to be brought back. They are living in crowded and unsanitary living conditions. Secretary Sir very nicely said hostels. Sir, labor camps from an ILO perspective would be, one that we see as being really the hotspot of even the spread of COVID. And this, because how do we expect social distancing if there are 8 people in an 8x8 room? So really, I mean, this has been such a big issue. So if we were looking specifically in the context of welfare, if we were looking specifically in the context of protection of our migrant workers, then what sort of elements do we need to look at going forward? And for that, I'd like to consider a few recommendations. One, and this is something that the government of India, in fact, the Honorable Prime Minister has mentioned this previously, about the role of diaspora communities. The fact that, in fact, in the last webinar, Sir, the Consul General of India was present from Dubai, and he mentioned, he quoted the Prime Minister by saying that the Indian community in the country of destination is the bridge between the country of origin and country of destination. I mean, isn't there couldn't be a better way of picturizing that perspective. And if that is the case, this is certainly the issue, certainly the perspective that Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and all other countries in the region take about the role of their respective diasporas and what they have contributed. And it is these very same organizations that come into supporting the protection and welfare of migrant workers. I remember also, sir, you had mentioned specifically in that last conference in July, you spoke about how the countries in the region, and all 4 countries mentioned this, the Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka mentioned it at the time, about how there were migrant workers who were in an irregular status now coming out of the quote-unquote woodworks. And that was a very good picture, because that also meant that there were protection gaps, and these protection gaps need to be bridged. So if we were to look specifically at it, how do we ensure stronger, again, what Secretary Sir alluded to, about bilateral labor migration agreements? As an example, Kuwait, a couple of months back, introduced, I don't think it's law yet, the expat quota bill. And I remember following the MEA press briefings, the Q&A that were coming out of the Ministry of External Affairs. Constantly, every Q&A, every day, MEA was posed this question by journalists in the country about how this was going to be taken forward. And every single time, back came the answer: the focus should be on strengthening our bilateral agreements and our bilateral conversations with countries like Kuwait to make sure that that the 8 lakh Indians that Kuwait said would have to return was not going to necessarily be the case. Of course, so that is something that we need to focus on with regards to going forward in the welfare and the protection of our workers, and bilateral conversations like that would be very, very crucial. One element, and this is not just South Asia, so not just in India, South Asia at large, something that we've been talking about. Secretary Sir spoke about skills. I mean, sir, I can just refer to your point for each one of my recommendations. If we talk about skills in that perspective, something that has constantly come up in the ILO conversations across South Asia and at the global level is the 4th industrial revolution. How are we going to prepare for the 4th industrial revolution? As Secretary said, the jobs of the future, the jobs for tomorrow in a managed COVID world. And if that is the case, then we have Swadesh as in India as a fantastic example of a database to collect the skills profiles of returning migrants. How do we expand this? And if we speak to NSDC, then we see a whole range of data disaggregation from national to states, from sectors, from one sector of construction work, let's say, to another sector like nursing or accountancy. So that kind of a data disaggregation is so important in the skills portfolio. But leading into that also the role of private sector. How exactly can we make sure that private sector is in every angle of discussion here? And by private sector, I specifically mean employers. Whether it is in the context of South Asia, where they will be responsible for reintegration, or whether in the context of the destination countries where that comes in through the bilateral cooperation with countries of destination. Regional cooperation, such an important perspective for the issue pertaining to the aspects on migrant welfare. Regional cooperation, Shashi, Secretary Sir mentioned about the Colombo process, but we also have a SARC. And the SARC has developed a plan of action. And that plan of action would be now a good step to take forward, given the fact that India and the other governments in the region have also created a SARC fund for COVID. So in that context, of course, it does not necessarily apply to migrant workers, but how do we ensure similar such SARC conversations that take forward the existing plan of action that was developed in 2016 by the SARC member states specifically. ASEAN is a great example for us to learn from. The ASEAN has developed a declaration as well for the human rights of migrant workers within the ASEAN perspective. So how do we exchange, peer-to-peer exchange between different regional perspectives, I think would be a good way to ensure that kind of a regional cooperation angle as well. Remittances. This is one thing that always captures our attention. And the reason why it captures our attention, because it has the dollar sign attached to it. And the moment we talk about money and finances, then remittances is the first thing that comes to play. Of course, in the context of remittances, India in 2019, as per the World Bank estimate, received $82 billion in remittances, but contributing to perhaps only about 2.6% of the national GDP. However, if you go to the state government, perhaps in Kerala or elsewhere, they'll tell you that is anywhere between 20 and 40% of the state GDP of these states. So how do we ensure that remittances is looked at not just as a financial aspect, but how it has been able to contribute to social determinants? And what are those social determinants? Health, education, food security. All of those elements are important for how remittances have been able to contribute. We've been talking about wage losses, non-payment of wages that migrant workers have gone through. Well, because of those non-payment of wages, it has affected our economy because remittances have dropped. World Bank estimates say that remittances will go down from close to $700 billion to about $500 billion. That's about 20% reduction. In March, Sri Lankan estimates said 30% was, in May, Sri Lanka said that 30% of their remittances had gone down. In July, in the conference that Secretary hosted, Bangladeshi additional foreign secretary said that in Bangladesh by July, the remittances had gone down by 20%. This is massive. This is going to show an impact on our informal economies already. We know in India, over 90% of the economy is already informal. In the case of Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka, it's over 60%. In the case of Bangladesh, it's over 70%. Nepal, 70%. So we are looking at how all of this will then impact our own domestic economies. And I will conclude with one final point, and that is specifically in the context of how recruitment and reintegration link into each other. And the recruitment angle, Shashi, does the thumbs up mean my 10 minutes are up or my 12 minutes are up? 2 minutes.
Last 1 minute.
Last 1 minute. Great. So that's it. The conversation is specifically in the context of reintegration and how that leads into fair recruitment. We need to keep in mind that if we do not have an effective reintegration policy, as of now, Secretary mentioned about the Immigration Act of 1983, which is still what we are working on. The government of India is currently following. But in Sri Lanka, there is a national labor migration policy of 2008, which was reviewed this year, 2019. So a new policy will come out early next year. That is important for us to consider. Bangladesh has an expatriate welfare and overseas employment policy. Nepal has a 2007 Foreign Employment Act. Here's a moment for us to really take the leadership on this, exactly like what you said, Shashi, from the South Asia side, because the countries in South Asia are ready, even in the policy framework conversations. And within that, reintegration, therefore, becomes an important conversation. And if we do not reintegrate effectively, people are going to be wanting to leave again because they don't have jobs at home. And if they're not going to have jobs at home, they're not reintegrated effectively, these people are going to migrate in a manner that is going to be extremely unfair. And I'm sure people like Dr. Suresh Kumar and the others from the recruitment industry will vouch for the role of subagents and the others, the unethical practitioners who will come into the picture. With that, Shashi, I stop. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Back to you.
Thank you, Shabri, for that very insightful lecture covering aspects like knowledge hub, role of diaspora, skills and changing world of work, regional cooperation, remittance, and looking at it not only as a financial aspect, but also as a social derivative, recruitment and reintegration. I've touched on several things. Those of you who have questions to Shabri, please post it in the chat box. We will be taking it up after all the panelists have made the presentation. Now it is up to Professor Tasneem. Tasneem, please make your presentation. Tasneem has a PowerPoint presentation, looks like, and 12 minutes, Tasneem. Yes, time starts now. Tasneem, you are not audible. Probably, please unmute your mic. Tasneem, can you hear us? Tasneem, are you there? Okay. Just to take it forward, what we will do is, if it is agreeable to Shanta Kolashekara, can you hear me? I think we have some problem with Tasneem's connectivity. So Shanta Kolashekara, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. So Shanta, I'll be grateful. We will be grateful if you could make the presentation now, so that let's try to get back. I'm sure Surabhi and her team would work on trying to get Tasneem back. But in the meantime, you could kindly make your presentation. Shanta, 12 minutes for you.
Yeah.
Oh,
she's coming back.
Sorry.
Yes.
She's coming.
Let Mr. Sharda speak. I think my electricity has gone, so he can finish, then I can come.
Thank you. So, that's what we have just thought. Okay, Shanta, it's yours.
Okay, then thank you, Dr. Sasikumar, and thank you for ICM for inviting me from Sri Lanka. And of course, as before organizing this, and also I say greetings to all the panelists, including secretary and other participants. Of course, that I can see one face familiar to me, Shabri. Greetings, Shabri, from Sri Lanka again. And when I look at the panelists and the participants and the amount of experience and exposure working in this policy area, I think only I can say is that I'm here to learn from all of you rather than I make any particular contribution. I would say to be very humble on this. And Shabri made a very good our overview of the context in which we are operating, and a number of important areas has been mentioned. Well, I think from my side, as you know, that my work, our work here in Sri Lanka is a combination of both engagement with government and migration policy-related work, as well as direct program interventions in the areas of labor migration. So I'm representing the International Organization for Migration, and of course, the IOM has been working for the last many years with the Sri Lankan government and its national institutions, and also with other international organizations, ILO, and other development partners in this, particularly with the recruitment industry and migrants and so forth. Well, I think at the very outset, I would like to share my views on the current policy context in the labor migration, which is actually very fluid and rapidly changing. Now, we mentioned about very many policy instruments that has been in place in areas of recruitment, skills development, remittances, and so forth. I think my first point is that how this current COVID pandemic has affected all these policy environment, and going forward, I really like the way the secretary mentioned that we no longer call post-COVID. And actually, we need to now actually manage COVID situation. That's very important. Going forward, probably it's important for us to look at how this policy environment could affect in the new managed COVID context. For example, I would like to say a few points about the current and emerging situation, particularly in the context of COVID and going forward. Now, one of the important areas is the labor market information. As most of you very correctly pointed out, there are changing labor market dynamics both in the receiving countries and sending countries. A lot of economic meltdown in number of these countries, and how that are going to affect the labor market demand sector in those countries. This needs to be very carefully analyzed in order to make inform policy adjustments in this area, I believe. And one of the greatest challenge here is we don't know how far we have the right information, data in these sectors. For example, how many industries actually going down, how many workers being redundant, and what are the prospects of new employment opportunities in these countries. At the same time, the new environment has changed rapidly the way that we work. If you can see the way traditionally we used to go to workplace and do certain work, now considerable portion of that work is now doing virtually from homes. And in this context, some of the labor market, labor foreign employment opportunities in the labor receiving countries may beginning to change. So some of the workers who earlier traveled overseas and took up employment in these countries may no longer required to physically travel and start that movement of cross the border may no longer required. Now, this is a new environment. We need to know exactly what are the sectors that going to affect these situation, the employment sector. For example, I know most of the IT related occupations, jobs are very much interested in this work modality. And there are a number of other areas as well. So this emerging trend, and that proper market information, data collection, analysis is required in order to make relevant policy adjustments in these areas. The other area that I would like to share with you is the protection during the recruitment and employment. Now, since there will be a cut down on foreign departures for foreign employment, there is a pressure building in countries like Sri Lanka for people to leave somehow and take up some employment. As Shabri mentioned, there's a considerable loss of remittance, which has affected all around, not only the economy, but their households, their incomes, their food security, health, education. So people will be desperate moving out, looking for new opportunities. Now, that will create a pressure environment where abuses can take place easily in the recruitment sector. So therefore, probably well-regulated recruitment industry, recruitment practices can be very useful, and more policy adjustments in these areas will be required as well. Now, ILO has introduced ethical labor recruitment standards, and application of these standards are very crucial. And not only the paper, but actual means and methods of how this can be done in a practical and very much transparent manner, so that the migrant workers get a good deal prior to leaving, and their pre-departure migration cost is low as possible. Now, at the same time, there are tendencies in irregular migration also in this context, because of the pressure of out migration is building and is continuing to build, and therefore you will see a considerable portion of workers would try to avoid the regulatory channels and try to secure employment. That will cause, of course, vulnerabilities and exploitation during the recruitment and post-employment, and during the employment as well. So therefore, this is one area where particular attention would be required. And also, I would like to touch base on the skills and its impact, as we all very aware that upskilling is one of the hot topics going forward, and there are a number of challenges in these areas. As if you look at the South Asian context, number of countries, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, and so forth, we are competing for the limited opportunities in the source countries. So therefore, how we can keep that limited opportunities with a upskilling program. Now in Sri Lanka, for example, dynamics are changing rapidly. Sri Lanka has a small population, which is 24 million. Out of that labor population, is around 6 to 7 million. So out of that, there are countries' economy need these people, and there's a limited capacity for departure in years to come. We can see that annual departure has declined considerably. It has been declining even after the COVID. There were these tendencies has increased dramatically. Now, at the same time, that means that Sri Lanka economy is growing just before the COVID, and Sri Lanka, in fact, having had a considerable foreign worker population in the country. So many workers from overseas came to Sri Lanka for employment. Those are migrant workers from other countries. So there's an actual shortage of workers within the country as well. So going forward, for a small country like Sri Lanka, of course, that when you compare with the big neighbors with big labor population in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so forth, the Sri Lanka cannot compete with the numbers with these countries because these countries can supply sufficient numbers to market, but Sri Lanka is not. At the same time, Sri Lanka need these foreign employment and remittance and the benefits of foreign employment. So only solution for countries like Sri Lanka probably is upskilling, so that you send limited low numbers, but still their earning potentials are high. So that's the one area. That for this reason, Sri Lanka also currently developing a labor immigration policy because at this point there are no laws that governs this area. That this is a policy work that is still to be taken place. At the same time, countries' human resource development policies.
Kulashekara, you have to wind up in a minute.
Yes, please. The human resource development policy is also key going forward. If upskilling is a point that is to be taken forward, now upskilling is one of the key central to the upskilling is what kind of people the education system provides, so that we have a proper vocational identities of population has been properly mapped, and those exercises will be trained for taking up limited foreign employment opportunities coming up. So these are in general that what I wanted to at this point mention. Over to you, Sasikumar.
Thank you so much. You have raised a very interesting point with respect to remote work, because what kinds of implications will it have for migration? I'm sure this is something that several countries would really would like to analyze, especially the sectors. Thank you so much. Now, I think Tasneem is ready. So Tasneem is all yours, 12 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful seeing Dr. Shashi. After, I think, 10 years, we are seeing each other. So it's quite happy and very delighted to be here. I must say the presentation that I have prepared, it's very specific. So after seeing how the discussion is going, so I'll just bring in a few issues in the beginning, then I'll go to a few specific cases that I have brought in. I think when we are discussing South Asia and all the panelists and also the Honorable Secretary in the beginning have said that migration should be in the center stage of any public policy. If that is what we are aiming for the last 5 years, I'm preaching for declaration of a migration decade. We should have a decade for migration. Otherwise, these countries sometimes will touch this issue or another issue. Now this is crisis, so crisis will come in, then gender, then SDG. So something one after another will come, but looking the whole migration issue as a comprehensive, as a, thing that is interdisciplinary and touches every aspects of life, if we think that way, then I think one of the major recommendations should be we should all lobby for declaration of a migration decade and mid-term, short-term and long-term actions all over the world to manage and govern migration. And of course, right is the major thing that actually drives us to think in this term. So anything we bring in, I think we have discussed skills and other things. I'll just bring in few issues. First of all, I would like to bring the issue of social cost of migration. This is one area we didn't really dwell much into, and recently we finished a study, and there what we find that migration is always impact on household is always determined household as a unit, but we never think how it affects different members of the household differently. When think of children, again, boy children, girl children, then left behind family members. If it is migrant left behind wife, it affects differently. And when it is left behind husband, it affects differently. Then sibling, elderly. Everywhere you have different types of social, economic need to really manage migration, manage absence of a family member. So social cost, like if I just bring in one issue, 85% of the children could manage when father or mother, one person is absent, but 15% of these children had difficulties in coping, and then, all kinds of psychological problems that's there. So one has to work on those things. One has to come up with program for how to manage children when parents are not there. Then let us come to the issue of, return and reintegration. I think all of us, all the countries, we didn't work much on reintegration, because when we think of reintegration, our main idea is those who are coming successful migrants, they have resources, they have remittances. So we think in terms of how to invest that remittance and how to use remittance as one of the way of attaining sustainable development goals, earlier, millennium development goals. So we want to use migrants as tool for development, but we hardly think about the need of the migrants from development. How he can be inclusive or she can be inclusive to the process. We hardly have been successful. The talks are there, but we are not successful in dealing that. And just touch reintegration, then at a broader circle, you need three types of interventions. First of all, there are battered, tortured, women, men coming, and then their reintegration, psychosocial stress management and others. It's a completely different ball game than a person coming here, going door to door for investment opportunities and services. So this person requires trauma management. And then the other group, if you think, irregular migrants. And then many of the irregular migrants are not irregular migrants. They became irregular in the process of how the global system of migration operates. So if that is the case, when these people return, they have spent a huge amount of money, and our data shows that 19% of the migrants couldn't even go abroad after paying around 170,000 taka, Bangladeshi taka, and then they couldn't go abroad. So when you count this money, it's a huge amount of money. The money lost for the migrant families, because state and others are not losing this money. So we don't count this. This is a huge amount of resources that has been and now, like emergency return, I think we had a talk on emergency return. What do we see? That none of these South Asian countries have a policy on emergency guideline, like during crisis situation, what are we doing? Let's go to compact. Do we get certain things which are providing all our countries to support our migrants through compact in the countries of destination, the type of detention, the type of arbitrary return, wage theft that are taking place? are we like, maybe as South Asian, we can develop a common policy on that. So there are other issues like if we go into database, for the first time, I know in any of the South Asian countries, there is no system of data of returning migrants. But then this time when the migrant came and we securitized the migrant as security threat, then we could come up with the data of the migrants. How did we do that? From the airport, we started counting who is coming and what migrants. So if we wanted, we could have done it much earlier. And I know when the COVID situation is gone, this system will be lost again, and we will not generate data through this, counting in the when they are coming through airport, through immigration, collaboration with immigration and Ministry of Expatriate and others. So from here, I'll just quickly go to three issues that recently, if we go to the next slide, three issues I would like to bring in that hardly we could give direct benefit to the migrants. It is like from 1999 onwards, like Dr. Shashi Kumar and others, we all talked about incentivizing the migrants, direct benefiting, taking direct benefit to the migrants. We could hardly do that. Any product we have, investment product we have, these are all for, migrants with large amount of remittance. But for the small and frequent remittance sender, we had nothing. So now in 2019 first half, major downward trend was there in remittance in Bangladesh. So straight away government listened to us, and this 2% incentive, whoever sending remittance through formal channel, they'll be given 2% on top of what they're sending. So you see, even now, it's a crisis situation. Of course, there are many other issues why the remittances in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nepal is again rising. There are many reasons, but this incentive, direct incentive, is definitely one of the things. And then I would say this is very important, this type of incentivization, because that way it is directly attained by the migrants, not through the recruiting agencies, not through government, or not through civil society, directly to the migrants. Next slide. Kindly, next slide, please. I think this is one thing I would like to share with South Asian audience, that recently, of course, for 1999, we were asking for regularizing of the dalals at the local level. So without dalal, we did a research and we found that it's a 5,000 onward study sort of interview. And then we found that you can't go abroad. 17 services provided to migrate are given by the dalals. So why not regularize the dalals and make the other layer under the recruiting agencies and make them visible and accountable, and all kinds of things that recruiting agencies just put the blame on the local dalals. Actually, they have to be blamed, but they can easily put it on the dalals. So that's where this model we have developed, and the Prime Minister has actually officially said that, okay, let's try to regularize dalal. Of course, from the recruiting agencies, we have major opposition against it. But we tried. Next slide, please. Next slide. So you see, we have developed this type of ways through which dalals can be regularized. We thought one could be through recruiting agencies, through government offices, or through the Association of Recruiting Agencies. We actually preferred the one with Association of Recruiting Agencies and asking them to open office in all districts, and then coming up with a system of providing registration to the dalals, and then we came up with this model. I think this is something later, if you want. This book is available online. People can look at this and see what we are saying. So next slide, please. these are very specific, but these are very important when we think of rights of migrants and when we think of arbitration, mediation and other things. This is what is needed. Now, next one, I would say we always compartmentalize migration with other issues. So climate change is one issue where it actually interconnected with migration, but we hardly develop this interconnection, and it is only recently we are doing so. ILO, IOM and others are doing it for quite a while, but individual countries are now taking into consideration this issue. So this is the Ministry of Disaster and Relief. We could convince them, and they are the one who came up with a national strategy to management of disaster and climate-induced internal displaced persons. This is where, since we were asked to write this document, what we did, we matched migration in a major way with disaster climate change issues. So what we did with next slide, please. See, prevention. Yeah, I'll finish. It's the last slide. So prevention of displacement, protection during displacement, durable solution. So if you think all these three stages, in these three stages, we linked international short-term contract migration as one of the many adaptation tools. And this is where, this is something, this document, I would say, everywhere, wherever we could, we put in private sector, we put in international migration as one of the, their right. It is their right to get benefit from the development, their right to benefit from whatever is taking place in the context of climate change, green fund and others, and how, they can be made, their access can be ensured, because the climate change affected areas are hardly, in the migration pocket. So what needs to be done? Those things we discussed in this document. So I'll stop here. It's just that there are many issues to talk on a, just on this hour, but I would again maybe time has come for a declaration of a decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasneem, for that very lucid presentation. You have raised very fundamental issues, very interesting issues: declaration of migration decade, social cost of migration, incentivizing. I think this is another very important thing that we need to look at. If you look at the developments in public policy, we are moving away from penalty to incentivization. This is happening across the board. And if you look at some of the best public policies in the world, they're all incentive centered. So I'm so happy that you brought several regularization of sub-agents. I'm sure we have some fantastic representatives and recruiters like Dr. Suresh Kumar with us. I'm sure you would like to comment on it here. We had already organized an event around it where Dr. Suresh put out very interesting propositions with respect to this. Thank you, Tasneem. Now we come to the last speaker of the panel discussion. And I request our friend Lakshman Bhai. Lakshman Bhai, it's your turn now to speak. Can you hear me, Lakshman Bhai?
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
12 minutes.
Shashi, Dr. Shashi, it's very nice to see you again after a long time. And of course, always pleasure to see Sabri. And Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for inviting me and speak on behalf of the migrant workers of this region. I work for the region, so I am speaking on behalf of Lebanese perspective, on behalf of the region, workers region. And unfortunately, to tell you very frankly, I don't have anything to hide, but I speak very frankly. So 9 months, the governance of migration has been exposed completely. And the lockdown created so much of problem, which we do not want to discuss right now, but we are thinking of the human tragedies happening. I mean, people stuck into the destination countries could not come back. And the consular service in the in the destination country was not up to the standards so that they could trust upon that, and the lockdown, and the country of origin did not want to bring them back to their own countries so that they can not spread their, COVID-19. Unfortunately, we were all stuck dumb when the COVID-19 was found in our region. And we did not know how to react. But people were desperate in the region, and they did not know who to come. And in the destination countries, people have been furloughed from their workplace without any payments, back dues, end of the work dues, and the tickets or whatever they were supposed to receive. And some of them just had gone to that places and they had to return or stay there in the concentration camp. I would not say that, this isolation camp, but like Sabri said, 10 people in a room by 10 room. It is very painful for them, and people have contracted disease, and when they came back here, they were not allowed to go back to their villages because they thought that these guys have COVID-19, and they were not allowed to come back to their own villages, and the government did not want to bring them. It's a very unfortunate thing that the workers could not come to their home itself. So we have a very, 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 and the trade unions were very much blamed throughout the region in South Asia. All the newspapers were filled with the abuses to the trade union that what are they doing? And nobody was ready to listen. What trade union could do? Trade union just could request the government to take care of the migrant workers in the destination countries and bring them back home. What else could they do? But this has a long implication. They had to sell off their land to pay the debt, which was taken into 3 to 4% a month in the interest, and they had to sell their properties, whatever they had pawned against their recruitment fee. So I would like to tell you in a very nutshell that there are 3 or 4 items which we have to take collectively as a South Asian if we want to work as a South Asian. First of all is the recruitment policy. That is in our hand, our own hands. So we have to look into the how can we do the recruitment policy. How can we do the recruitment policy? Like our sister from Bangladesh says, the tag. Give them the license. Who are we? And that will stop the trafficking. From Nepal, it's a huge women trafficking through India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And we don't know what to do. We get rescued from India, Sri Lanka, and even Kuwait. So let's do an institutionalized process, work together so that we can stop in the name of the better job in migration. They don't know. The people from the hills, they don't know whether they are going to India or they are going to Bangladesh or they are going to Qatar. They have not seen. And this is one of the very serious matter which under the hands of the country of origin, with which they can handle it very properly. The recruitment policy has to be resolved. Why should I pay 150,000 to 200,000 rupees to go to a job and pay back for 18 months? Somebody has told me repeatedly, it takes 18 months to pay back that loan, what they are taking. And they have to return back in a very, very short time. How are they? Well, sometimes they come in boxes. And who is going to pay them back? They have, the whole generation is under this this loan cycle. So this has to be collectively. We need to have a standard contract. ILO says so. ILO says that recruitment, the first letter of the first policy of the recruitment has to, the country of destination has to tell us that anybody comes to our workplace are free of charges, or we are taking discharges. Why should I go to a company where I don't know what kind of job I am going to get and how much is the wages? As soon as I reach the country of destination, they will tear off my contract and say, this will work in only your country, not here. Here, this is the new contract. And I cannot do anything because we are so desperate to come out of the job, of the country. I went to Bangladesh in a Ramru program, and we had in 3 years ago, and we had this GFMD happening in Bangladesh, and I went to the Bangladesh Dhaka University. That's where this program was supposed to be held. And I asked the young men of Bangladesh, young people, what do you want to do? They were talking in Bengali. So I coming from eastern part of Nepal, a little bit understand Bengali. So I said, why do you want to go? We have nothing to do here. We just want to go out. And one time I went to Doha, Qatar. And in one of the Sanai hostel, I went there. And the gentleman from India told me, why don't you ask your own people, your government to do the better negotiation for your own worker? I said, what is the problem? Look, this young man works in the 45th floor of this place, outside the scaffold. I work the same thing there. He's a better worker than me. But when I fall from 45th floor, I will die, sure. And he will also die if he falls from the 45th floor. But he gets less paid than me. So ask your government to do the negotiation. How can I do the negotiation? Nepal has no strength to do the negotiation. So I looked into the SARC 2014 that they should come together and do the negotiation for the whole region. And everything is ready in SARC, but there is no meeting. It needs a political commitment. Whether do we want to work together as a subcontinent, or do we want to compete with Bangladesh? And the employers comes to me and says, okay, Mr. Nepal, we would like to take people from here. How much is your cost? And I tell you one cost. And they say, no, Bangladesh is ready to give lesser cost. So in this competition, we are going into the spiral, hitting to the bottom. So this has to be agreed if we are looking for future of the migration. Skills. I have flown for so many times through ILO governing body, through Qatar or any other country. And they say, brother,
Lakshman Bhai, last 2 minutes. Please
Okay.
wind up in 2 minutes.
Sure. So they will ask me, please fill out the forms for me. That kind of people we are sending. So how can we reskill them? They have to be given very strong education here, pre-departure, where they are going. So it has to be started from the very beginning, from the recruitment to the negotiation. Are we as a South Asian ready to negotiate with the ADD? They come there fully prepared. But Colombo process decided one thing, and whatever happens in ADD is something different. So we have to accept the sellers, buyer's market. They put their terms there. Okay, we have a corridor between UAE and India. So this is the way we will take people. So when India accepts, we have to accept it. So these are the things. I hope, Mr. Secretary, that India takes lead in the migration in the South Asian region. I mean, we cannot negotiate. And unfortunately, India has two interests there. One is workers' interest and other is business interest. Which comes first is your priority. For me, I have worked with the workers for the last 30 years. My priority is workers' priority. I don't want to see my workers traveling 1,000 kilometers or 100 kilometers when the lockdown starts, which was in my country has happened. We have seen this thing happening in India. So our priority is workers' priority. So let's make an understanding that the workers' priority and business priority converge in a point where everybody wins. That is the real purpose of a GCM, that everybody wins. The government wins, the employer wins, and the workers also don't lose, they win. So let's work tripartite. Let's work social dialogue. Let's work through the GCM process, ILO process. We will reach somewhere better, stronger, united. Thank you very much, Mr. Shashi Kumar, for giving me this.
Thank you, Lakshman Bhai. As usual, you have highlighted the issues confronted by the workers, particularly how it got aggravated during the COVID and how it exposed the migration structure governance across the world, and arguing for a regional negotiation platform, highlighting issues like duplication of contracts and recruitment costs. Thank you so much. Now we have some questions in the chat box. What I'm going to do is, I picked up a couple of questions, first for Shabari. Other panelists, so please read some of your questions. Shabari, there are two questions that is directly addressed to you up front. First by PSRE, referring to the bilateral labor agreements. What is your take on it? And the second by Dr. Suresh Kumar on how is it that we need to think in terms of dealing with illegal recruitment or irregular recruitment by unscrupulous. So you please take these two questions first, and then we may come back to you if time permits. Shabari, quick
Thanks
responses.
So yeah, thanks, Shashi. One, on BLAs. And in fact, PSRE, who is present here, he is the expert on BLAs, who has researched on BLAs. So thank you, PSRE, for drawing attention to that. Let's recognize straight away, off the bat, BLAs is a foreign policy issue. BLAs is one that immediately attracts the attention, and rightly so, of the ministries of foreign affairs, or like in India, Ministry of External Affairs. Therefore, the role that the ministry or foreign affairs ministries have to play in this is of utmost priority, because that has to do with an agreement with a foreign government. In this case, India has done quite a few things. As an example, India has, for instance, social security agreements with a number of European countries in the form of BLAs. I think about 17 agreements, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that is a good perspective to have. Nepal has a very strong BLA with the government of Jordan, specifically looking at workers in the garment industry, women workers going from Nepal in the garment industry to work in Jordan. So a specific bilateral labor agreement on that. What, however, is a problem, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh also have very good BLAs. But the problem is that a lot of the BLAs have not reached the BLA title. They are still MOUs, Memorandas of Understanding. And that is important. We need to first look at how we upgrade the MOU to the BLA, because we know that an MOU will not necessarily be implemented or acted upon simply because it is an understanding and one that we hope will work. How do we make BLAs more gender responsive? Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India are big sending countries for domestic workers as well. Let's recognize that. And if that is the case, how do we make these BLAs more gender responsive? How do we make these BLAs strengthen or stronger by including a whole of government approach? For instance, the best example that was done was in the context of repatriation now. India has repatriated over close to 2 million migrant workers from around the world, Indian nationals. That has not happened simply because India wanted to do it. India did it because it had a good bilateral relationship with the country of destination. So how do we make use of some of those elements in a whole of government approach, inter-ministerial coordination? Like for India, like for instance, India did this with MEA, led by MEA with the Civil Aviation Ministry, with the Ministry of Health. The Swades database on skills was done with the NSDC, National Skills Development Corporation. So all of these entities coming together. And maybe one other element is the role of embassies. Embassies are the immediate face to help ensure that BLAs are implemented. So how do we strengthen the role of embassies along these contexts for the different countries in South Asia? When it comes to recruitment, and thank you very much, Suresh, for raising this. When it comes to any aspect of recruitment, we need to first say, right, what element of recruitment are we looking at? Fair recruitment. Fair recruitment, I look at some of the perspectives that Tasneem has put forward. How do we ensure the regularization of what Tasneem says, dalals, sub-agents, right? I mean, this is, in fact, if you look at Kumar's questions, he's also raised the very issue about sub-agents, the unscrupulous recruitment agents. How do we regularize them in a manner that they're brought into the system? There was only one country that had actually regularized it, and that was Nepal. They had regularized sub-agents. But unfortunately, in a way, fortunately or unfortunately, the government decided, no, it's not going to work out because a lot of migrant workers are struggling. So how do we reconcile the differences between those who are struggling, the migrant workers who are struggling as a result of these unfair recruitment practices, and those with the understanding that sub-agents do play an important role? So we need to reconcile that difference to make sure that recruitment practices continue to remain fair. How do we use the ILO guidelines, for instance, for fair recruitment? How do we ensure that the definition of recruitment costs is inserted within existing national policy perspectives and so on? Shashi, there are other questions as well, which I've taken note of, but I will, I follow
we'll
the
come back
from this.
after one round. Okay, Tasneem, there are two questions that I can spot for you directly. One is, how are the existing reintegration, because you have done a lot of work on reintegration and you have very strong views on reintegration, saying that it's not been looked at very carefully in the South Asian context. What are the, I mean, one is existing policies and their efficacy in dealing with the current COVID-induced returnees. Second is, how do you see the future? And the second question is, say, what are the, I mean, this is a question raised by Binod also. I say there are, whenever there's a regional cooperation, there are conflicts of interest. You know, there are conflicts of interest. It's easy to say regional cooperation. But what are the areas, according to you as a researcher, as an activist for migration for a long time, which can be considered for regional cooperation outright? Tasneem.
Thank you, Dr. Shashi. I think you remember we developed this South Asia Migration Resource Center, SAMREN, and we did work for 10 years, together, and so many things at a civil society level we could do, and that showed that if governments are interested, there are many areas where you can work together. So if I want to identify some of these areas, first will be data. So data, each country requires data, particularly return, those who are returning, and then again, job linking. With those who are returning, they're linking them with the job. So developing job portal, if we combine ILO, IOM and others, combine their resources and then develop a job portal as well as a return data collection systems. So that will benefit all the countries. So it can be easily, these are common things. All our brains can be together and we can develop as a South Asian tool, and then each individual country can practice. Then second is certain research. I would say, particularly recently, we completed one research on, how migrants are seen as, spreading or acting as foot soldiers of terrorism. So this is a very interesting area, and I'm sure within next 5 years, you will see some quarters linking migrants with terrorism. So this is one area, how to keep it desecuritized and how to say these are all jargons. So, and then, coming up with that, why these migrants are never the target group of the current system of online based extremist activities. So all these things we can do together. We can develop that consensus. And then if we think of mediation, one thing, recently we are practicing it in the grassroots level. It is that so many migrants are cheated and then they don't want to go to court. So we can come up with a South Asian mediation model. That model will actually help anyone in the rural area to go to local level mediation committees and then mediate cases. You will be surprised how much money we have recouped from at the local level from the dalals, because at the end these are not dalals, all these dalals were linked to migrant recruiting agencies, and in the end recruiting agency paid those monies at the local level. So this is one mediation model. These are small things. You can't go for big things. You do small things and then you make it South Asian. I think that is very much possible. And okay, now let's what are the controversial issues? We have seen wage, then labor market entry. These are competitive. But then again, why can't we think in terms of OPEC, and why can't we think in terms of keeping, we have been working in this field for years after years. Why can't we develop a common interest? And it is difficult. These are the difficult areas. Now, the next issue, I think, COVID and how it has, this particularly affected on social costs, families, its effect on left behind families. I'll just quickly mention that 200 cases we have collected, and that's where what are we finding? That 60% of the households are not receiving remittances. Only 40% of the households are receiving remittance. Then how come remittance is going up? Remittance is going up for a different reason, because recruiting agencies are not paying with that money at that area in the destination countries for purchasing visas. It is like, all these under invoicing is gone with the manufacturers under invoicing and needing this money for, what do you call, for paying in the country of international market, and then here for tax evasion, just only 10% they report and pay tax. The rest they take from hundi. So all these are coming into formal channel. So these are the things. If you think that, don't mistake that migrants are in a better situation because remittances are increasing. That's other. So, and then again, interestingly, women are sending, 70% of the women are sending remittances, 30% of the men could send remittance. So you see, this particular COVID crisis financially actually touched more women than men. And then left behind family, how are they managing when they don't have remittances? How are they a majority, more than 80% of these households have major income from remittance and then have minor income from other sources. Those minor sources are there, but then again, from 17,000 taka per month, they have reduced their expenditure to 7,300 taka. So this is how they're managing. Loan, they're managing through male households are managing through loan, female households are less through loan because they have more remittances. And then food intake, reducing food intake. So if you think all these things, these are, things that COVID has exposed how the families are doing, and how come government didn't have any package for these left behind migrant households, one-time cash grant and others. Why? Because they don't have the voice. That is why in the policy, you need that left behind migrant family members are included in any discussion when we are discussing migration.
Okay, thank you. Shanta Kulashekara, we have a direct question to you. Sri Lanka Board for Foreign Employment, Bureau for Foreign Employment is short of resources. So it's withdrawing all labor attaches and officers from their missions. What is your view on this? Please unmute your mic. Please unmute your mic. And unmuted. Please unmute your mic.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. This is in the recent development when the new administration came in, and there were a number of similar policy decisions was taken. If I see that the composition of the labor attaches in Sri Lankan diplomatic missions overseas, come from two sources. One set of officials are coming from the Ministry of Labour, and the second set of officials are coming from the Bureau of Foreign Employment. Now, the reference that you made is withdrawal of staff coming from the SLBF, which is the Bureau of Foreign Employment. Now, first of all, it's a government policy decisions. I'm not here to articulate any of their policy position on this matter, but we can simply elaborate the benefits of having these the officials in some of these countries in order to provide a particular consular assistance and protection mandate for millions of Sri Lankans in some of these countries. Particularly, the timing is crucial because, as all of you know, that a lot of migrant workers are in real need of these assistance, particularly the protection and repatriation related. But the government is confident that within the embassy's diplomatic structures, those consular assistance and protections can be delivered unhindered with the existing infrastructure. So this is what I feel. Yeah.
Thank you. And the last question is a general question that was open to all, but I would give Lakshman Bhai the privilege of addressing it. I mean, there is a Colombo process, and what do you think? Is there any cooperation actually at the SAARC region, or do you want some other institutional structures? Lakshman.
It is the process which the SAARC process is going on, but it has no meeting for last 4 or 5 years. So I mean, I think it has done so much on migration, and why should this process should be stopped? I think it is a very good process, and the Colombo process is the SAARC process is completely unique for South Asia only, but the Colombo process is for Philippines, China, and all the other migrant workers sending countries, and it will be very difficult for look into the South Asian reality in the Colombo process, because some of them are very far advanced countries like Philippines. I mean, we know how the reality of the Philippines is completely different than our reality in South Asia. So to be very connected to our own ground, we must agree with the SAARC process and take it to the Colombo process, where a greater alliance can be developed. A greater alliance can be developed. But the SAARC process is the key for Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and the South Asian countries. And not only that, Colombo process, we have to bring in the East African countries, because they are also now partners in the GCC countries. And GCC countries is also looking into the East African countries. They are going there to bring the East African. And if you go to the GCC countries, and East Africans are full of taking places which used to be for South Asians. So you have to compete with them. And I would say they are much more. The East African people are much more competent than. For the same job, what we were doing in Qatar or Abu Dhabi or UAE or Saudi Arabia, they are very English fluent, very disciplined, and very presentable. So
yeah, thank you, Lakshman Bhai.
One more line.
Yeah,
the market is shrinking, and we have to compete. So it's up to us how we compete.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, of course, there is already a directive from the organizers that we should be stopping. But half a minute, Shabri, if you have to wind up something. Half a minute, Tasneem, if you want to wind up something. First, Shabri.
Thank you, Shashi. When Binod sir asked that question, and I think that is such a crucial question in this conversation about what are those elements. And Tasneem, beautiful points, the simple perspectives that we can take forward. I immediately had a, easy, difficult column, huh? And I started putting things together, and I didn't know which was easy and which was difficult anymore, right? Because they are complicated. I mean, I was thinking of where do I put Tasneem's mediation model? As an example, how would the justice system in India differ from the justice system in Nepal to Bangladesh and Sri Lanka? Local level perspective, state level perspective, all of these things, but important. However, if I were to conclude, it is the one point that I would like to raise is specifically in the form of exactly what we are doing now. It's so easy. Conversations should never end. Conversations should never stop. And I know that is easy. It's easy because it helps build on for us to keep the momentum and helps us build from where we let out previously. Good example is Government of India's leadership and the fact that the other countries, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, rallied with the Government of India in the sub-regional meeting on evacuation and repatriation in times of COVID-19. That became the first sub-regional conversation for COVID focused on migrant workers in South Asia. What a tremendous perspective that is. Because if we don't have these conversations, if we don't have this dialogue, it's not going to go forward. Thanks, Shashi. That will be my...
Thank you, Tasneem. You have the last word. Wind up. 1 minute. You please unmute your mic. Thank you.
Sorry. I'll again reiterate that migration is something, it cannot be done, alone. So we need a UN decade on migration. That will be my thing. And in the South Asian context, we should all, work together, as Sabri said, that there are a lot of experiences, commonalities, as well as one solving a problem and other can learn from that. I think we should continue this dialogue. We should continue what we are doing.
Thank you so much, Shabri. Thank you so much, Shanta Kulashekara. Thank you so much, Tasneem and Lakshman Bhai, for those wonderful inputs. And thank you, ICM, for organizing such an event. It's over to you, Sir Ravi.
Thank you, Dr. Sasikumar, for efficiently moderating this discussion. I would now request our Joint Secretary, Shiabagani Ramu, to make the formal vote of thanks.
Good evening to everyone. First of all, let me warmly congratulate the moderator and all the panelists for extremely useful discussions, enriching information and thought-provoking ideas. So first of all, let me mention about Dr. Sasikumar. Thank you so much, sir, for such a efficiently organized panel discussion. And Mr. Nair, of course, I've been hearing you for a long time, and very, very pointed, sharp, focused points for thinking of making policies in future. And Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui, and your ideas of social cost and human-centric migration is very important for all of us. I think every policymaker should keep migrant at the center. I think your ideas, and we'll be analyzing more about your presentation. I think very detailed, useful presentation. I will be going through once again to know more details about the ideas put forth by you. And Mr. Shanta Kulashekara, it is very useful to know the perspective of Sri Lanka, especially the country is moving from the labor exporting to looking at getting migrants into Sri Lanka, looking at immigration policy and upskilling them to go for a better value-added services abroad. So that is very interesting thing for us to know. And Mr. Lakshman Basnet, thank you so much, sir, for such a useful interaction, which you made important points about the SARC process and the regional cooperation, which should be the case, and we should activate the processes which we already have to make a very effective labor migration and safe and legal migration. And with these few words, I wish everyone a very safe stay and take care of yourself, and also want to thank all the participants for joining this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr.
Sir,
Shafi,
before we
don't
close-
go again. We should be in touch. We missed
Before we
you.
close, may I request that everyone turn on their camera so that we can
Yes.
take a group snap.
All of you, please come on, turn on your cameras. As Shurabhi was saying, wonderful faces of Vinod sir is coming up.
Hi, Vinod.
Please, everybody, please, whoever can switch on their cameras, please switch on. Surabhi wants to take a photograph.
Interesting.
Andrew?
Sanjeev Kumar.
Yeah, good to see everyone.
I think we had a couple of snaps. So thank you once again for joining us. We will be in touch with all of you for our future discussions as well. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tasneem, stay in touch.
Yes, we should be in touch. I'm happy I'm in touch with Vinod, but I'm not in touch with you. We should reconnect.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thanks,
then.
everyone.
Okay, then.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye, everybody. It was wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was well executed and
Thank you. So thank you, sir. Shashi Kumar, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you, sir. Well
Thank you,
moderated.
sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
എന്തുണ്ട് നമുക്ക് കുറച്ച് മലയാളമൊക്കെ പറയാം
ശബരിയെ കൂടെ വിളിക്കാം
ശരി ഓക്കെ
ഓക്കെ ഹലോ
കാണാം
നോക്കുമ്പോ
ഓക്കെ സബ്രി ഓൾ ദി ബെസ്റ്റ് താങ്ക് യു
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Shabri.
Bye-bye.
And Shurabi, bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye,
Surabhi.
Professor Siddiqui.
Yep. Bye.
Okay, bye, Surabhi.